Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and however you're listening to this podcast, it is mighty fine to have you with us today. On this episode, I have Bill Hutchinson, and Bill is the Director of Customer Experience for Dropbox. Bill is a real expert and advocate when it comes to the customer experience, and I found this to be a particularly interesting podcast. Number one, I like Bill. I've worked with him in the past. And number two, I think right now, the customer experience in the context of COVID, and especially what Dropbox do, which is that cloud-based storage, is a fascinating conversation. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. Welcome to Leadership Bites with your host Guy Bloom, a leadership podcast, conversations, just me talking and occasional interviews. Check us out at livingbrave.com, and when you enjoy the episode, subscribe and tell everyone. Bill, it's absolutely great to have you on this episode of the podcast. How are you?
Hey Guy, I'm good. Thanks a million for having me.
Pleasure. And I know we know each other a little bit from the past as well, and we've reconnected, so I'm particularly happy to have you on. First things first, it would be great just for people to hear from you, who you are, the role that you have, and who with.
Yeah, sure. I have had a look at some of your previous guests, so I do feel slight imposter syndrome by being here. So loving the podcast as well, Guy. Congratulations on that.
Thank you for saying that.
Essentially, I've been in customer experience roles for the last 18 years in everything from utilities, telcos, to the aviation industry, and now in technology. My current role at Dropbox is focused on really two key areas. One is about preparing our CX teams and their ability to successfully support all of the great products and features that we build for our customers. And the second piece is really to advocate on behalf of the customer internally within Dropbox. That's where my passion lies, is representing customers in organizations. And the interesting thing for me, Guy, is everybody I meet and work with is, to use the buzzword, customer centric, or everybody believes that they are. So really it's about how do you implement kind of structures and processes that enable customer centricity in an organization. I still haven't quite cracked the code, but I've picked up some useful stuff along the way.
And just for people that don't know, when you say CX, that's referring to?
It's a really good question, right? So I actually had this conversation with one of my colleagues yesterday, what does CX mean? Because I have a perspective, which is, for some reason, somewhere in the last decade or so, the role of customer service was rebranded to customer experience.
And just to check in, CX means customer experience,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Great.
Essentially, the rebranding of what was customer service was labeled as customer experience. But I actually I disagree with that, because they're not the same thing. And I think if you think about customer experience in the broad sense, it's any interaction that a customer has with your brand, your product, or your service. Therefore, we shouldn't necessarily limit our perspective to a support experience alone. It's an extremely important and critical part of the overall customer experience. But if you think of your processes, your policies, your software, whatever it is that touches a customer, that's all customer experience. And I think quite often what I've noticed in companies is the customer experience concern or worry or insight is almost packaged to, that's Guy's job, that's Bill's job. It's not all of our jobs. I don't know if you've seen that in your years of consulting as you go into the business, that actually the CX guys or the CS guys need to be worried about the customer. The rest of us are too busy working on the business.
I think what I do see is a general compartmentalization in most roles. Brand is the marketing team. We just have to do our processes correctly. Well, no, because you're also representing the brand. And, well, selling isn't us, that's the sales team. Yeah, but we're customer service, and we can sell through our service. So I think that's not just necessarily about what might be happening in any one area. I think that is inherently true, that the tribes, if it's not done culturally correct, take up their own position and off they go, and they put the blinkers on, and they do a very, very good job doing their process, but they're not taking into account the overall concepts as you've been speaking about.
And I think it's great to have domain experts and real champions in the business that can advocate and build influencers across the organization through their expertise, their capability, the structures that they can implement. But like you said, I love the idea of You are ultimately a corporate citizen for your organization. In the Amazon world, they call it the day one mentality, which I love the idea of. It's like, how would you act on day one? What types of decisions would you make on day one? You know, you'd be the CX guy, you'd be the marketer, you'd be the sales guy, you'd be the logistics guy. And I think that day one mentality is something that personally I strive for as well.
I like that. And you get that, imagine if you were the owner of the organization almost, or if you were a major stakeholder, what would you be caring about?
Exactly.
And there are these kind of factors. I heard one a while ago that I literally have taken as my own and used wantonly since, which is if this was your probationary period or if this was a job interview and you were actually telling people about how you'd engage with the business as well as just do your job, what would you talk about? And you talk about taking an interest in everything. You talk about contributing wherever you can. You wouldn't say, well, I just focus on my own stuff, put my head down, and I'm sure that everybody else will sort themselves out. And I think it's that kind of recognition, as you say there, about that willingness to contribute outside of your own need.
The other point I'd make on that is it can be hard to, like in large organizations, because when you have scale, you need some level of rigor and process to organize your work and your people to be as effective as possible. So it's like a constant balance between not becoming stifled in the fact of, well, Guy, that's your job, that's not my job, but also having the ability to scale. It's just an interesting one that there is no perfect answer, I don't think, but I do think both of those tracks are worth considering on a regular basis in what we do.
For somebody such as myself who does leadership development and cultural development in organisations, this is very much geared towards I don't really mind what the department is or what the processes are. It's about whether or not we, as a collective, are going to put our energy into it. So I think we can come back to that. Those stepping stones that you did briefly allude to it. I often find that I'm 51 years old. Some of my stepping stones to get to where I am, I still kind of look in the mirror and go, how come I'm sitting here with the main board of a FTSE 50 company? I'm still that bloke who was born in Birmingham and didn't do that well at school. The reality is it makes sense, but it probably didn't make a lot of sense at the time for me. So I'm always fascinated to hear, how on earth did you get there?
Yeah, so listen, keep me honest in terms of detail, right, and how far back you want to go. But I think, similar to you, I have enormous moments of I go, what am I doing here? Everyone in the room is smarter than me. I'm terrified to contribute. I have so many stories over the last 15 years where I've been in situations where I've just felt completely and utterly out of my depth, but also fortunate because a lot of the time it was because somebody put me in that position. So I've had a lot of really strong leaders over the years. And I think that's been the biggest thing for me is been lucky enough to be surrounded by people that had incredibly high standards. And that was the thing that I think has shaped me the most, and I'll come back to that in a second. But in very simple terms, you said boy that grew up in Birmingham. I grew up in Waterford in the southeast of Ireland.
Oh, it's an Irish accent, is it?
I'm surprised you can understand it, but
I've been saving that little bit of humour up since we started this, so I do apologise for shoehorning it in there.
Yeah, so I grew up in the southeast of Ireland. I was the youngest of 9 kids, a good old Irish Catholic family, was okay at school, was more interested in sport, got a job in a contact centre when I was 17 to pay my way through college and never left, which was interesting because I always joked that I had the option of being a quantity surveyor, which was sitting in an office with a load of old blokes, or being in a contact centre with 400 people my own age, a lot of really good social events. So I chose the sensible path and stayed with the social events. People say to me, great grounding is contact centres. I worked frontline for a number of years on everything from technical support to sales to customer service. And the ability to adapt and flex your style is actually a skill that I'm still leveraging, that I didn't know I was learning probably at that young age, but stands to me today. You're dealing with every aspect of society. And at the time I was working for AOL when they were the biggest internet company in the world. And
it's funny just to pause on that for a second, isn't it?
Sure.
AOL. That's a name that if you think back to search engines and just how they looked and the changing face of that whole dynamic, for us to have grown up in a space where mobile phones came in and the internet happened, and that's something that is just worth a pause. What's that phrase? I hope you live in interesting times.
It's huge. And it's so interesting. They literally owned the internet.
I know, I remember.
You remember you used to have to log into their client and it had instant message, email, search, all within their specific client.
Yeah.
I remember when I was technical support, I used to help people connect to their 56 kpbs broadband. And you'd be speaking to Susan in Rotherham, and she'd be shouting at her kids to get off the internet. She needs to make a telephone call, and how things have moved on in such a short period of time. But that's a really good example of a business that maybe were complacent, because when I worked there, they were incredibly ahead of their time. Their leadership development programs, their career pathways, their philosophy on coaching, all of those things, when I look at what companies are doing today, they're still only, I would say, on par with what I was seeing in AOL back then. Now, I didn't realize at the time, but they were just really on top of their game. And I always wonder, what was it from an innovation perspective that they fell away?
The beauty of these podcasts is we'll jump around, and I've just made a note to come back to your career path, which I don't want to lose at all, but we'll follow this rabbit for a second. But this is, I think, the balance between like a Blockbuster. There's a great document floating around somewhere where somebody in Blockbuster had said people like coming out and they like the family experience of selecting a tape and buying popcorn at our outlets. Well, the reality is they like doing it on their sofa more. All the training and all the leadership programs and all the culture in the world is only a vehicle for delivering a good strategy. And I think that's an interesting thing, maybe when you reference the AOL situation.
I totally agree. And interestingly, if you think about that specific company, there was a huge takeover by a very large corporation in the US who didn't have expertise, I would say, in the emerging internet, right? What happened was you had a very big company with deep pockets, but not the expertise purchasing what was now the biggest internet company in the world. The takeover was with a view of kind of owning content, if I recall it correctly. The reality is, as you said, the strategy was just not there. The thinking was not there, and ultimately we all know what happened.
Let's get back to you.
Yeah.
You were at AOL.
Yeah, so I spent about 7 or 8 years at AOL. When I got over the social gatherings, I thought, right, I need to get serious about my career, and I began to really knuckle down. Had a lot of great roles, so I worked in the training and development team. They used to have a graduation bay owner, which was when people would come out of training, you would be almost like a nursery for new hires who would spend a couple of months with you, and you would qualify them to their full capacity, which again was pretty innovative for the time. But I suppose the big step was I got to move to India in 2004, where I was responsible for setting up an outsourcing operation within Mumbai on behalf of AOL. So we went from 0 headcount to about 250 in the first year. We then had expansive sites in Delhi, in Bangalore, and then eventually AOL merged with TalkTalk in the UK, and they had 7 or 8 sites just in India alone, and I was part of the account management team based in India looking after those operations. So that was a really interesting time because obviously culturally India was very different. It was a very new experience for me, and working in significantly different cultures was something I hadn't experienced. If we fast forward a few years, I then moved to the UK. I worked for Orange, which then became EE. And then I met you, Guy, if you remember.
I do.
You were the...
Of course I remember. That's why we're here.
You were the hotshot leadership development consultant at Blue Sky.
Of course I was.
I was, one of these up and comers that joined. So I did consulting for a couple of years. Learned.
Did I talk to you, Bill?
Not really. I had to talk to your people.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. I had to talk to your people about having a conversation with you. So it was hard to get you. I think at the time you were writing books and
of course
being
I was
philosophical about life.
Sounds about right.
While us guys did all the hard work.
I built a career on it. Move on.
But Blue Sky was interesting. I spent 2 years essentially consulting frontline level of many organizations. So we did amazing contracts with lots of really big organizations. Just again, seeing how leaders in different industries work, how different companies work. And I worked with everyone from Barclays Wealth Management to Bombardier, who build trains, to Prudential, who sell insurance. And we had lots of success. As you know, Blue Sky were an award-winning consulting practice. Especially at that time, they were really ahead of the game. So I always felt that the project or the program would run out of money, and we would be, just as you were gaining momentum, we would have to potentially step away. And what I learned years later was I did the psychometric test. What's the one with completer finisher? You probably know better than I do. I'm a completer finisher. And the thing I didn't get from my consulting days was box ticked off, we've really finished the job. And that's no disrespect to any kind of consulting profession, but I do think there is a sustainability challenge for a lot of consulting initiatives. That's why I was eager to move back into an organization. Spent a couple of years then at British Gas. Interestingly, our goal there was to increase net promoter score on home visits and get the engineers that visit homes to sell. As you can imagine, the unions weren't overly eager for us to do that. But one of the really interesting things was we involved the engineers in the design of the program that we did, and what they came up with, not me or the design team, but what the engineers themselves came up with is our job is to fix the boiler, the gas, the heating system, and give safety advice. And we were like, okay, that's interesting. So you see it as your job, as your role to be almost a safety officer for the work that you do in that house. And they were like, yes, 100%. And we went on some home visits with them. And as they show up, as you can imagine, I've got kids, you've got kids. It's like if your heating system is out, the van, the guy shows up in the uniform, he's already Superman, right? They really took pride in the role that they had to play. So when we were like, do you think you could sell A, B, or C? They were like, hang on a second, that's not our job. Our job is to service the need and then make sure that everything is safe. So when we explored that more, we thought, how do we build on that? Because a lot of the products that we were, or services that we were selling, were around efficiency and safety. So the engineers designed this wonderful program which was around safety and efficiency advice. The byproduct was, yes, we sold more, but actually the intent was clean, which was when you go to a home, maximize the visit by providing advice on the efficiency of somebody's system, but also giving them safety advice on how the home is set up, from like carbon monoxide detectors, etc., etc. So we had a very successful program. Their NPS was phenomenal anyway. When we started the program, it was in the high 40s, and when we finished, we ended up somewhere in the mid 60s. So customers were actually extremely grateful for the advice that was being provided to them to make them more secure, to make them more safe. And it's amazing. At the time, British Gas Service and Commercial had 7 million home visits a year in the UK. Really, it was just about leveraging the knowledge, the expertise, the capability of the engineering operation and building a better customer experience. So then, kind of jumping around, I moved back to Ireland. I got an opportunity to work for eBay, heading up their UK customer experience, which was amazing. Back in technology, back in retail, and e-commerce was really exploding at the time. From eBay, I moved on to Rynair, which is probably the most game-changing.
I just want to stop there and go, I know you were always the professional, but God, I bet you got some stories about that one. My brain jumps in there.
It depends. I'll give you one story about my interview process, which it was just kind of tease up the way that my time there was. As the last stage of the interview, I was asked to meet Michael O'Leary, and as you can imagine, he's the most famous businessman in Ireland, maybe in Europe, larger than life character. And I'd obviously done well through the process to get to meet the main man. I was wearing a tweed jacket.
Of course you were.
With elbow patches. I was like a teacher or a lecturer. So
Fantastic.
At the time it was very fashionable. So I go in and he said to me, oh, you're not one of these fucking tweed jacket wearing wankers from the tech industry. The first thing he said to me, I was still kind of stuck about to answer, and before I could say anything, he said, I saw you went to WIT, which is Waterford Institute of Technology, where I went to college when I was straight out of school. And before I could even say yes, he said, had you no ambition? Like, what's wrong with you? And I was thinking, where's the HR practices? I've never had an interview like this. So
Can I call my mum?
Yeah, I need help. And interestingly, that's the way it went for about 45 minutes. It was like quick fire, barrage of content and insults and different things. And at the end then I was like, okay, I've handled myself okay. And he goes, okay, let's do a deal. And I was like, yeah, if you want to send me your offer letter, I'll consider it with my wife and so on. And he was like, no, we do a deal now. What's the number you have in mind? And I was like trying to tot it up in my head in terms of like what I wanted. And before I knew it, I'd shaken hands. I'd left the office and I rang my wife and Lauren said, how did it go? And I said, I have no idea, but I've shaken his hand. I'm starting in the next. It was really interesting. And then obviously I joined Rynair and I was responsible for all of their customer service teams. And that ranged from, workforce management, training and development. They had a big legal and regulatory compliance function. Their call centres, both in-house and outsourced. Their reservations team and a number of other back office functions. So it was a big role in terms of numbers, but also budget-wise, it was over a 200 million euro budget just in terms of the money that would go through my teams. And I had a direct line to O'Leary, who's very hands-on with the business and manages every aspect of the business quite closely. A great learning experience. A lot of people say to me, oh my God, how could you join them? Like they're the least, customer-focused business out there. But having been on the inside, I learned more about customer focus and customer centricity in Rynair than in any other business I've ever been. The reason is they're laser laser focused on what is their value proposition, what is their differentiator, and that is low fares, which is enabled by low cost. Everybody, whether you're O'Leary or whether you're on the front desk, everybody is tuned into save money, focus on cost. There's no values, right? There's no company values. There's no vision statement. There's no mission statement. There's none of that stuff. But everybody knows inherently what their role is in the business. And that is to deliver differentiated cost management and value.
Well, culture is the conversation. In this consultancy space, it's change the conversation, change the culture. If somebody like I come in with a team, and as you used to, if we can change the conversation, we can change the culture. Actually, what I'm hearing you say is if that's the conversation, that is the culture. So that's what people were talking about. That was the focus. So everybody did know what they were doing because everybody else was talking about it.
Totally.
And that's really interesting. Martin Long, when I used to work at Churchill Insurance, you said a couple of things there that really resonated with me. Once I remember him saying, listen, let's be absolutely clear. We're a marketing company that happens to sell insurance. And that really struck me because I thought we were an insurance company. He was going, no, we just happen to sell insurance. But actually, let's be under no illusions. We're a marketing company. That's what we're here to do, market stuff. And it happens to be insurance. Now, it doesn't matter if we agree or not, but that absolute clarity of don't get misaligned, don't think we're doing something else here. That is what we do. And that really struck me. And one other thing, picking up on your meeting with your soon-to-be new boss, I remember when I just certified, deliver the Myers-Briggs psychometric profile. By the way, Belbin was the other one with the complete to finisher.
That's it.
And I walked in and I'd done loads of these profiles over the last 6 months because I was newly trained and he wanted to understand whatever it was being trained on. And I went in and with Myers-Briggs, if anybody doesn't know, you get a 4-letter coding that indicates your particular profile. There's 16 you can have. He'd filled out his profile. I was all, God, I'm in the room with the MD. This is brilliant. I've cracked it. And he went through it all and he looked at me and he went, so you can be an ENTJ or an IST. Okay. There seems to be one missing guy. And I went, is there? And I was very young and just not really sure of myself at all. And he went, yeah, because I think there should be one that's TWAT because we've got a lot of those and this doesn't seem to pick it up. And I never forget that. Yeah. And at the time I didn't know what to do with myself.
Yeah.
But what I also realised is what he was basically saying is this is great, but it's very vanilla. I mean, everybody's a winner, right, guy? And again, agree or disagree is not the point. But when you do get to that level, they are there for a reason. They have very particular traits that they're usually far from perfect, but they also have great insight, totally. Even if they're a little bit bonkers.
And look, there's no perfection here, right? We're not saying it's perfect, but one thing I loved about working in that environment was it was so real. There was no politics or, bullshit really. It was raw and there were a lot of shortcomings and challenges as you would have in any business or any dynamic teams and relationships. But the one thing I just loved and took away is that clarity of focus on what is your business model, what is your target customer, and ruthless prioritization around achieving those things that you need to achieve to deliver to those customers. And I think a lot of businesses could learn a ton from it.
And that's interesting, isn't it? Because this is the grounding that you're talking of. It doesn't matter what my market was. It doesn't matter whether or not it was as inverted commas as cool and sexy as some of these other names that are out there. It's what I learned there.
Totally. You talk about pinch yourself moments, right? So I'll give you another interesting story. If you remember a few years ago, there was a rostering issue at Rynair where we had to cancel 22,000 flights based on the rostering error. As you can imagine, I'm running all of the customer support and experience teams. That was pretty torturous for customers as well. And we were dealing with, as Rynair does, an enormous media backlash, internal backlash, and just a wave of work, a tsunami of work, I would say, trying to figure it all out and fix it. And during the process, as you have in Europe, a lot of heavily regulated countries that are very interested in aviation, O'Leary and myself said we would do a fly around to the regulators to apologise, essentially, for the mess up. So myself, Michael, a couple of the other execs in the company arranged all of these visits to different government bodies. And essentially we want to say, look, we are doing our best to recover the situation. We are doing actions A, B, C, and D to make sure customers don't lose out in any way, shape or form. And then we had, Michael, our CEO, there to apologise in person to say, this is on me. Here's what we're doing about it. And when the Belgian regulator heard that we were coming, they actually brought in the vice president of Belgium, which at the time was Chris Peters. So we're in this meeting where there's O'Leary in the centre of the desk. There's a couple of other leaders from Rynair across the table from the Deputy Prime Minister of Belgium.
Just another day.
Yeah. Right? And Michael kind of looks to me and says, so Bill is going to take us through the recovery plan. And I'm going, I'd love to just video this situation and WhatsApp it to my mates and just go, look at this. This is insane. But like, I think, you know, I spent a number of great years there. I still love the business. I think it's a wonderful model. They've got edges that I would soften if I had my way. You know,
if we were in charge, right?
If I was in charge, I'd have my way. But a really good learning experience. And then I got the opportunity to come and work in Dropbox. And I'm a techie at heart. I love software. I love gadgets. I love anything to do with technology. And I've always wanted to, you know, spend my long-term career in technology. I just got too big an opportunity to go and work in Rynair that I couldn't turn down. I had a wonderful experience there. So sorry, very long-winded answer, but...
No, I love it. I love it. I think it's perfect. And just for anybody, because, you know, the thing about podcasts is people drift onto things that sometimes they may not even intend to. Bring anybody up to date who's thinking, oh, I must Google what Dropbox is when I come off the episode.
I've been trying to explain this to my mum and dad who are in their late 70s for quite some time, so I'll explain it there. So I'll start with that explanation. Dropbox is probably one of the most well-known brands from what we call a file sync and share service provider. It started off in the mid-2000s when our founder and CEO, Drew, he kept losing his pen drive. You know, the pen drive you used to stick into your laptop and you download your files. And when you were a consultant guy, I'm sure you lost the pen drive before your pitch and you were panicked, and it was just
been known to happen.
A very nerve-wracking time, and he was just fed up of having to rely on pen drives, and they kept getting smaller as well. I don't know if you remember that, so your likelihood to lose them would increase that. So he created an online storage company back in the 2000s, which is now a fully cloud-based file sync and share business. So that's our core business, and it means that as an individual, as a small business, as a large business, as an enterprise, you can organize and save all of your files in one easy-to-use place online. They continuously sync, so everything is always up to date. And really where we're moving towards, and we have moved to, is more of a collaboration platform. So our goal is to build on our strength of file sync and share and content, and enable teams and people to work more collaboratively, especially in this accelerated distributed work experience that we're in at the moment.
I can imagine if you work for Zoom, all of a sudden you went to bed on Friday, you woke up on Monday with COVID and the world went insane, because all of a sudden, if you didn't know what Zoom was, you flipping well do now. Has there been a difference or an impact since all of this COVID stuff started?
We've definitely seen a surge in activity as people use our services as they work from home more. You know, so for example, we've seen an increase of 40% in our business trials at the outset of the pandemic, which is a good indicator for people are looking for solutions to help them collaborate more from home and from wherever they're working.
So that's your journey into Dropbox, and that's what Dropbox is. It's fascinating for me to hear how people got to the roles that they were in, and some of the things you've said about almost wanting to show your mates really resonated with me. I was in the US doing work with Getty Images, and I was sat with the main board of Getty on an away day and just thinking up to myself, and I looked round at my colleague and he was looking at me and I was looking at him, and he went, I know, right? I went, yeah. And it was this unspoken truth of, so we're in America with the main board of Getty Images. Well, how did that happen? So I do really, really resonate with you on that.
I think it's great to have those experiences. And that's why I always say luck has been a big part of it. Because yes, you can work hard and be committed. I know a lot of hardworking, committed people, but those individual moments where you go, holy shit, this is crazy. I don't have them that often, so you should try and enjoy them.
I'm going to ask you to consider using the word circumstance rather than luck. Because your circumstances, right, that you're in because they present themselves to you. Luck, may not have had much to do with it. It's the old golfing analogy. The golfer hits the ball, it lands on the tee, and I should Google it and know who said this, but somebody shouts lucky shot and he goes, well, amazing, isn't it? The harder I practice, the luckier I get, right? Just coming back to that original conversation that we had at the start where I said, let's just pause on that for a minute and come back to it around customer service and customer experience. Somebody turns around to you and goes, hey, I've heard this phrase CX CX or customer experience. I think I know what it means. It's customer service, right? What does the weight of your years bring to that conversation, and how do you bring them up to date with your thinking and how to frame it and think about it?
Customer service is an integral component of customer experience, but it is one component. And depending on your business model, defining what the other key components of the overall customer experience are really important, and understanding those. So for example, in an airline, there is the digital experience, there is the physical experience, and there is the customer service experience in terms of policies and procedures that surround the physical customer journey. In a software company, you've got many multitudes of product experiences that you interact with and interchange with on a regular basis that, in addition to the customer service or support experience, need to be measured, need to be understood, and need to be clear. The key thing for me is having a clear idea of what success looks like for a specific customer type or segment. So for example, if you have a individual photographer who's about to use Dropbox's software to run his content for his business, essentially operate his entire business from the cloud on Dropbox, his needs, his desires, his journey through the product experience is very, very unique to him. And it's very, very important that we understand the moments that matter for that specific customer segment. So what we're doing in Dropbox is mapping out the product experience with our product teams, understanding what are the critical decisions that customer needs, what are the critical moments that matter. So for example, the first time he uploads a file, when he signs up for the trial, when he enters his credit card information, like all of these moments need to be really thought out and really considered from a customer experience standpoint, because ultimately that's what will drive long-term value to the business, but also long-term value to the customer. So when I talk about service versus experiences, we are all custodians of customer experience across the business. Service is a component, but it isn't the only component. And I think the more people you can get on board with that idea, the more people become customer experience leaders within the company.
Yeah, this is about that underlying sense of purpose, I guess. This is about do what you've got to do, but have in mind constantly whether or not it's pointing at that result for the people that we want to connect to and engage with our service.
Exactly. And if you think about the generational changes that we're experiencing at the moment, the example I use are my nephews and nieces who are teenagers and a little bit older. The way that they connect with companies is almost entirely digital. Like the service experience, as in the human touch, is almost an uncomfortable alien experience for them.
It's interesting, isn't it? They almost don't really want to speak to anybody, frankly.
Absolutely. So I think thinking about customer experience design overall as a customer service team's problem is a real challenge. I do think most companies know this, like it's not rocket science, but getting it right is the challenge. I mean, you must be seeing this in terms of the people you speak to. How is it manifesting itself in your world? Are you seeing a uniformed ownership of the customer experience, not just by the specific designated team as such?
My answer to that is often intellectually yes, but not always in reality. And because I focus on team effectiveness, which is the ability of the senior team to have a unified purpose beyond their individual tasks, have role clarity, not just in terms of the job that they do, but how they need to be with each other as a team and the way that they communicate with each other. Some other factors as well, but those are the two or three of the main ones, is the intellectualization of what you said, which is a harmony and an approach that's shared, is often underpinned by their capacity to actually put aside personal differences, deal with their personal fears about whether or not they're struggling in their own role or what might be happening in their department, etc., etc. So I think intellectually it's an easy thing to sign up to. It's like agreeing that I should be fit. Oh, yeah, it's all about the customer. Yeah, there's almost nothing to disagree with there. The reality then is what's actually going on in the mind of the individual, i.e. their personal narrative around their intent and their personal integrity and whether or not they can. And in the work that I do, I talk about trust, accountability, bravery and connection. And connection means the willingness to contribute outside of your own need. And if I'm in another area, it is a lot easier for me to go, well, CX is his responsibility or her responsibility. As long as I nail my processes, I'm good. I don't think it's a problem intellectually. I think it's something that needs to be understood behaviourally, if that makes sense. So I do see it, but I also don't see a lot of it. And that's where I then work to say, I don't really mind where the focus is. I'm not the business guru here, but whatever it is you are focusing on, that's where as a team, we need to learn how to do that properly. So we're not literally falling into the trap of verbalising good intents and then leaving and playing our own game. And you must have seen that as well.
Yeah, totally. And like, I'm always interested in people's perspective on, like, when you think of companies that you use or services that you use, what jumps to mind in terms of where you feel like there's real alignment across the organization you know, getting the service from and their customer experience? Like, what jumps out to you if you think about 2 or 3 companies that just get it right?
This is where it gets very, very tricky, because I think the ones that I used to have were retail based. And now I switch into the digital delivery. When I think about companies like Amazon, which would be an absolute classic, even though I can have issues around what they do and how they operate, my experience of them as a customer is I basically try not to buy from anybody else unless it's Amazon, because it's so much easier. And if there's a problem, they just deal with it. That whole thing of they're not trying to wow me as a customer, and that whole idea of stop trying to wow the customer. They don't wow me through doing things like sending me a bunch of flowers or sending me a gift on my birthday. They actually wow me by it actually turning up. And if there's a problem, I can send it back, because the processes are just, they're making it effortless, and the idea of effortless service.
Yeah.
So they make it pretty effortless. I used to buy from a shop because I wanted to be able to take it back to the shop if there was a problem. And that was the thing, buy it from there because then you know they're there. And then it used to, oh no, buy it from John Lewis because they'll give you a refund if there's a problem. Those decisions were made like that. But now I go, oh, I'll buy from Amazon because it's just easier. And guess what? If it's a tenner, because I live in a first world, I probably won't send the blinking thing back if it's faulty anyway, because I just can't be asked. But if it's a big thing, I know I can. I don't know. It's ridiculous, but that's kind of how it's gone.
Yeah, I think we're Prime customers, and we order a lot on Amazon, and it's sometimes we've ordered 2 things by mistake, and we contact them and say, look, we've ordered 2, and they're like, oh, keep it. It's more expensive for them to take it back. And they're just like, every process they have is really well thought out, and it's really, really well engineered. I've got a couple of friends working in different roles around Amazon, and when I talk to them, the customer focus, and I mean proper, like real customer focus in their hiring at scale, and then in their processes, how they do business reviews, how they focus on every aspect of the customer experience. It's just hardwired into their DNA. And, I have the moral dilemma of I want to buy from the guy down the road. But actually, as you said, with kids and work and busy lives, it's Amazon just take all that hassle away. And it's probably the number one example that most people use.
And it took me a moment just to reflect there, because I was just thinking to myself, there has been a change. There has been a shift in my lifetime. I've got 2 boys, and my oldest, who's 8, he's not ordering off Amazon yet. But what he is doing, he is ordering through Amazon through me. But let's be clear. So he's definitely doing that and popping things in the basket and then going, I'll put some stuff in the basket, Dad. But also what he's doing is, interesting enough, Netflix would be an absolute classic example. He watches his programs. He watches them back to back. He doesn't know what terrestrial TV is. Doesn't care. He saw something on one of the terrestrial channels a few years ago, and we watched an episode, and he went, oh, and then he went to watch the next episode. And I went, no, you can't do that until they release it. The next, and he literally looked at me, and what do you mean? Yeah. I said, well, it'll be next week. Next week. And he wasn't being petulant. He wasn't being, you could say that's the epidemic of the middle class kid. What do you mean? I've got to wait? So there was no nastiness in it, because he just went, well, I don't have to wait for any of the other stuff. And here's what he said, which I thought was fascinating. He handed me the remote control, said, thanks, Dad. It was great to watch that. I won't be doing that again. Oh, what do you mean you won't be doing that again? He went, I don't want to watch it if I can't watch the rest of them. So thanks. And then just wandered off and went back to YouTube and and Netflix. And you go, oh, and I think that's interesting, isn't it? That customer experience. What was true last week, last month, is now that new category of human being that's coming through. They've got a very different experience that they expect.
I love that. I think it's like, that is what you call a disruption of the largest kind, in terms of a product that we all love transformed itself to be far more customer centric and conditioned the next generation to just not tolerate how it used to be, almost a commodity, like it's just expected, and the final one I'd say, in terms of like, if you think about software and products and so on, like I always use the Apple example. I mentioned my dad there, who's late 70s. He can upgrade his Apple software. He doesn't know what it's doing. He doesn't know why it's doing it. But product experience is so well thought out, easy to do, whether it's setting up your phone or updating your software. Like, that's, for me, is what customer experience is of the future, where there are no creases.
I am interested by that, because I think if you think about things like London Underground, right, it's great, but it's a nightmare. And then you go to other countries where they've built their underground more recently, and it's a lot easier because they had a fresh start and they could just design it accordingly. Now we look at certain products they've been around a long time, which were in essence the new invention, but now a newer company's come along. They've started from fresh, and it's better. It's quicker. You could talk about online banking and go, well, the older banks brought in online banking, and then there were banks that started up new, and all they were online banks. So guess what? It's a simpler, slicker process. So I am fascinated by what was cutting edge. Maybe it's back to that AOL and that Blockbuster. I mean, Blockbuster was, when it came to the UK, you'd never seen anything like it. I am very interested by the capacity to stay ahead of a curve. An example I use, which is a guy called Reg Revan. He was the father of action learning. He referenced that learning should be equal to or greater than the change that's going on around you. Learning should be equal to or greater than the change that's going on around you. And I think it's indicative of people like yourself who go, am I offering you the thinking of today, or am I offering you the thinking of tomorrow? And to take operational boards or senior teams that are trying to deal with the pressure of the moment, but also saying, what's our understanding of where this is going? Because somebody else could, in theory, come into this market with what we do. If they came into it and it was just a heck of a lot easier, what might that do to us? So what are we really aiming at, and how up for looking at ourselves through the lens of a 12-year-old are we, as opposed to us being in our 30s or 40s? And that must be interesting.
And I think that thinking is, if you look at the history, is where it's the make or break of the company or team or individual. And I think, like, if you take the AOL example, one of the interesting experiences that AOL was strong on was you had to log in to their software to access the internet. But if you think about Google as an ecosystem by which connects all of the internet into one easy to use space. And I think over the last 15 or 20 years, what we've seen is that ecosystems have become the central theme of the internet. So, somebody in a boardroom somewhere at AOL was saying, we need to maintain our client software. You need to log on to the client on the desktop. We own you. You chat on AOL. This is when chat rooms were the big thing. The reality, though, is the most successful companies now are ecosystems, and that will continue to be the case. Even Dropbox, we're partnering with the likes of Slack and Zoom in order to have deep integrations with these partners, so that we remove some of the noise of people's working days, so that they have a one-stop shop, so to speak, to try and stop distraction. And I do think that this theme of ecosystems and will continue to develop and shape how we work online, but also how we use the internet for our personal lives.
Interesting you talk about ecosystems, and I actually have a sense that there's two types of people. There's people that want the ecosystem and they want to be completely immersed, belonging to that brand and that feel. Apple would be a classic case in point. But I stopped using Apple products purely because I felt trapped, purely because I couldn't get out of their ecosystem, i.e. my music would be a classic. I couldn't take it out. And somebody could argue there are ways of doing it. Well, nobody I knew how to do it. And I went to Spotify. Why did I go to Spotify? Well, that's the Spotify ecosystem. But it's just a button. It's just a thing, and I can have it on an Android phone, or I could have it on my iPhone as well. But I didn't like being trapped. And yet there are other people that go, oh gosh, no, I wouldn't want to not. I want it all integrated. So it's a very interesting thing, which is probably, I don't even know there's space for it on this, which is the way that the human mind moves towards, I want to be fully immersed and I want it all to work. Also, yes, but neither do I want to then be in a situation where I can't leave and I'm trapped. And some people will never mind that, but other people will react quite negatively to that. But it's just that I just recognise that within myself, and I do see that within others.
I do think that, I don't have an inside track. I know a lot of people who no longer use Apple's operating system for that reason. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is the demise of Apple, but I do think I do think it's a trend that a lot of companies, from a customer experience standpoint, need to be conscious of, that the more your product or service is integrated into how people use the internet, the more successful you're likely to be. That would be my viewpoint. And if you look at the likes of Facebook and Instagram, TikTok, all of these social media platforms are becoming the ecosystem at which the younger generation consume content and the internet and ultimately advertising. So I do think that being conscious and aware of how does your product or service integrate. A good example is someone asked me recently, oh, but Bill, you work for an airline. You can't have an ecosystem. It's a plane in the sky. And my argument is that if you think about the digital product of the airline, the digital product is where people spend most of their money. So arguably, Rynair now is a tech company with an airline attached to it. You buy all of your ancillary products through the app, through the website. And, they're looking at lots of add-ons and services that they can provide through the digital experience and the digital window. I'll give you an amazing stat. When I was working there, I think something like 60% of people book their flight first. This was obviously pre-COVID. 60% of people don't book their hotel before their flight. So essentially they're turning up and they're going, I'm going to book the flight first, see what the price is, the times are and so on, and then I'll book my hotel. That in itself is an enormous digital opportunity to say, we know that you guys are going to book hotels. You're coming here first to purchase your actual flight. How are airlines capitalizing on that experience? The traditionalist would say that we're an airline focused on being a good airline. However, there will be a company like an Uber, like a Deliveroo, as some sort of an ecosystem that will join those dots in a way that is really customer centric and will make it easy. And then I think the airlines will be an afterthought, and ultimately they will be providing a service to whatever tech company figures out that experience. Yes.
Where's your focus going within the organisation? Is there anything that, as people within your organisation listen to this episode, and I'm sure some of them will, or people from outside also pay attention to it, any thoughts, reflections on anything that you think could add value to people's thinking over the next 12 to 24 months in the industry or the market or on the topic of CX?
Yeah, I'd probably just say everybody is feeling anxious. From my experience, there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of employees. There's a lot of uncertainty in terms of businesses. There's a lot of anxiety out there. And I think for me, my focus is going to be how do we support our customers, put them first through this difficult time? How do we make sure that they're successful? How do we keep the show on the road for them and do that in a really thoughtful and empathetic way through our employees and through our customer experience? I do think that we are going to have a very, very difficult 12 months from an economic standpoint. I do think there will be more stimulus packages to come, and I think there will be large-scale job losses. And I know that sounds pretty dire in terms of a note to end on, but I do think that I'm optimistic in the long-term future, and personally, it's really just focusing on supporting your team's customers through the 12 months until this thing is beaten.
So listen, I'm going to bring this to a close. Bill, just stay on the line for a few moments just so we can wrap up. As I bring this to a close, I just want to say thank you very much. This has been a great conversation for me, and I'm sure it will be for others as well.
Thanks for having me, Guy. Great to catch up.
That's it. Subscribe so you keep updated on new episodes. Visit livingbrave.com if you want to connect with us and find out more. This has been Leadership Bites. See you soon.